it turned into a conversation podcast. So there are some episodes that are fashion straight tailoring focused, but those are few and far between. Mostly it's about people, because that's why I got into this business to start with. I love taking care of people. I love this. I love to see the change in a lot of my customers through what I do, which happens to be clothing. And so the podcast has really become an extension of that. And, it's been great for me because I just get to meet so many wonderful people like you from all over the world.
Oh, thank you.
And make new connections and so on. So yeah, but the audience now, I mean, we're about 55, 56 episodes in. But the feedback overwhelmingly is that they just love being taken on this journey of meeting someone new, like you and I. We've never met before now, and kind of going on that journey of us sort of connecting, and then getting to know each other, and then getting into a conversation, and it kind of feels like people are just eavesdropping on two new friends, and also getting a lot of value out of the conversation at the same time. So yeah. So if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's actually a lovely concept for an article or for a book of exactly what you just said. So I'm glad you were recording, because you just wrote a pitch for an article or a book. I mean, I don't think people think of podcasts that way, and it's such a poetic way to think about it.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, brilliant.
But this is why we're here, because you are the guru when it comes to creative thinking and pulling ideas out of.
Well, you had the idea. I pulled it out. I just noticed it. But
you
noticing
coached it out. You coached it out of me. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
That's really poetic. Really, please write it down.
We have. I will. We have so we have radio shows here, the same as you guys do. We have one particular talk radio show, and there's a host called James O'Brien. He is a master at having callers come in at him with their very, very strong, opinionated, often uneducated views, because that unfortunately is the world we live in these days. But he's very, very good at disarming them, breaking down their argument, and then kind of leaving them better educated than where they were when he found them. And he brought out a wonderful book. I can't remember the name of the title, but it's something like Why I'm Always Right or something like that. But all the book is that he's taken segments from his radio show. So he does 2 hours every day, Monday to Friday. He's just taken segments of certain callers and just turned each one into a chapter and then put it into this wonderful book. And I did have the idea at some point, because some of the conversations I've had potentially would work in that way as well. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. If you ever want me to help you go do a pitch for a proposal, I can help.
Wow, that's gonna be like a whole new world for me. So yeah, you're gonna interrupt my thinking a lot in the next 45 minutes or so. Wow. God, this is so exciting. Okay, let's go. Welcome to the Tailoring Talk Show with me, your host, Roberto Revilla. I'm a bespoke tailor, menswear designer, and owner of Roberto Revilla London Suit and Shirt Makers. This is the podcast where you drop in for the threads, but often leave with something quite unexpected. I talk to self-starters and creators about their journeys, the highs and lows, and the lessons they've learned along the way. If you haven't already, please support the show by subscribing. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please help me out by leaving a rating and a review. Today, we are focusing on creativity with a guest who is a master of her art. The Carnegie Foundation lists her as among the greatest teachers of our time. She has published over 20 recognized books in her fields of expertise. When it comes to design, writing, and research, she's a multiple award winner. She's an expert in creative advertising, branding, graphic design, and social media, regularly called a creativity guru, and she holds the title of Distinguished Professor of the Michael Graves College at Keene University in the US of A. Tailoring Talkers, I am so privileged to be spending time with this lady today. Please join me in welcoming Robin Landa to the Tailoring Talk Show. Robin, how are you?
I'm so happy to be with you, Roberto. I'm a huge fan of yours. I would love to spend the entire time picking your brain about design.
Robin, so we're recording on the 23rd of September 2022. I have been so excited to spend time with you because I meant it, what I said in my intro. You are a master of your craft, and we're both in creative fields. Today is the 20th anniversary to the day that I walked through the doors into my first job in tailoring. So I'm right now with you celebrating 20 years in the business. This is so serendipitous. It's amazing.
Happy anniversary. Thank you for inviting me on this special day for you. How wonderful. Congratulations.
If I'd actually remembered and been better prepared, I'd have sent a case of champagne or something over to New York.
Well, I should send it to you
together. Brilliant. So, Robin, you are in New York. You're in my other favorite city in the world, and right on Broadway.
Right on Broadway.
One of my favorite places in the world. How's New York?
We're doing great. We're hanging in there. We're no longer a hot spot for the pandemic, so that's really great. And the weather is beautiful, and people are back in the city after the summer, and theater is open again. So it's just museums. It's just marvelous. And I love. I think you're in London, right?
Yes, that's right.
My other favorite city.
Yeah, we haven't been back obviously for a little while because of the pandemic, but I honestly can't wait to get back out there again. The last time we were in New York, I remember it was freezing cold. It was probably late January, early February, and you all had the weather warnings, like people weren't supposed to be going outside if they could help it, and if they did go outside, you had to cover your face so you didn't breathe the cold air in.
Oh my goodness.
I remember it being like maybe -10 or something like that. And then
that's unusual, yeah.
Yeah, my wife decided that we should go to the Empire State Building, and she also decided that we should go to the very top. And I remember saying to one of the guards on the elevators, how cold is it up there? And I remember them saying it was an amazing stat. It was like, well, it was -10 on the ground, but up there it was like -19. And we did go outside, but I only lasted literally 3 seconds. I couldn't take it. And I just remember this big fat pigeon. I have a photograph of it, just staring at us sat outside, just staring at us through the window, like, you weak humans, who just kind of sat there, just kind of happy in those freezing temperatures. But
next time you'll have to come during Fashion Week. It's a much better time of year.
Yeah, I think so.
And really well suited for you.
Yeah, no, totally. So Robin, you have a new book coming out to add to the many that you've already written, called The New Art of Ideas: Unlock Your Creative Potential. So that's due out in November. So why don't we actually start there? I'm going to jump around with you a little bit, so please forgive me in advance. But tell us about the latest book.
This book is very, very exciting for me because it's a book that actually goes cross disciplines. Usually I write for designers or art directors or creative directors or brand experts or marketing. My book previous to this was aimed at the business side of marketing. But this book is really for anybody who wants to generate an idea. And there hasn't been a new method since 1953, when Alex Osborne introduced brainstorming. I'm sure you and your listeners all know about brainstorming. That was the last new process.
Firstly, I can't wait. I am going to pre-order it as soon as we get off this call. And I'm strongly going to urge everybody who's listening to this to do the same, especially if you're in any kind of field where you need to generate new ideas and come up with new ways of thinking and approaching problems and problem solving. post-pandemic, Robin, I don't know if you're finding this at all in your interactions with your students and the people in corporate world that you work with, but coming out of the pandemic, the world seems a little bit more complicated. The way that people are working is changing. You and I being on this call together is one example of that. Zoom has become such an integral part of our lives. There seems to be so much more that's hitting us, and I'm finding as a creative that I am more regularly. So I tend to think of creativity as a free flowing river full of ideas that travel along, and some of those ideas make it to a source, and some kind of don't quite get there, and others will kind of find their way into little tributaries and things, and they'll kind of sit there until eventually they're dislodged again, and then they kind of join the main flow of the river. And are you with me on this?
Oh, it's really, you're such a poet. And listeners didn't hear you in our pre-talk, but I said what you were saying was so poetic, and you're doing it again.
I'm very visual, so when I'm talking, I'm usually in my head, and this river is free flowing and I can see it. But what I'm finding is that there are so many more log jams in life these days that for creatives like me, I'm finding that there are more blocks every other day that interrupt my thinking, but not necessarily for the better. Are there any exercises? Are there any approaches that you take to dealing with? I guess it's called creative blocks.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think people during lockdown and subsequently are languishing. It's kind of this awful feeling that we're doing our work, but it doesn't feel as vibrant as it used to. But I do love your metaphor of did you say a stream?
Yeah,
Or a
a
stream?
river.
A river, like the idea of the flow, because flow is really important in creative thinking and in thinking in general, because we want to always try to connect ideas and have it be part of our lives, and not just, okay, I'm going to sit down and design today, or I'm going to sit down and figure out a new medicine, and now I'm going to think. It has to be, as you said, with us all the time. And I think it's really important to stay open to new ideas. A lot of people are so concerned about staying in their own discipline and staying in, whether it's a vertical or it's in your area. But it's so important to explore other areas. And that is something you can do on Google, right? You could even visit museums on Google Earth. You can visit cities on Google Earth. But it's really important if you think about somebody like Lin-Manuel Miranda,
Mm-hmm.
who had just finished In the Heights off Broadway, and he was about to bring it to Broadway, and he had been working on it for 7 years off Broadway, and he was exhausted, and he was going to take a beach vacation in Mexico, and he wanted something to read. Now, most people would think, first of all, a beach read is a light read. And secondly, why isn't he reading something about theater or music or lyrics or acting?
Mm-hmm.
He's about to be the star of a Broadway musical. But he picked up the biography of Alexander Hamilton. And if he hadn't been curious about history, about American history, we wouldn't have one of the greatest musicals of all time, one that actually changed the language of theater. He cast hip hop artists as the founding fathers. He brought hip hop to Broadway in an integral way, because hip hop was in the Heights, but it was a kind of eclectic musical score for In the Heights. But Hamilton really changed everything. He cross-casted. But he was curious. And being curious and open about a lot of subjects can really prompt thinking. And then the other thing is to just really listen. I'll go back to another theater example.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy O. Harris, who wrote Slave Play, which was a huge hit in New York, but very controversial, had the notion or the budding of the idea at a party by listening to a conversation. And he thought, oh, I really have to explore interracial sexual relationships. I mean, it hit him at a party, but he was listening for it. So I think as you say, it's this river that we're in. And if you want to think of it as being in the ocean of it, or it's just, you always have to look and always be open, because then you notice possibilities. But if you're thinking, oh, well, I just have to sit down and have an idea, that's much more difficult, although I can give you a way to do it.
I would love that. I also feel a bit stupid now because, or I feel like a dum-dum because my example of getting out of my own head is really mundane compared to the Lin um, man. Sorry, God, why can't I say his name?
It's a tough name, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yeah, exactly.
We'll call him Lin.
I remember actually seeing him in the Emily Blunt Mary Poppins.
Oh, yes, yes.
I just thought they were both so wonderful in that. But for me, sometimes when I get a block in what I'm doing, which is creating clothes for people and so on. I mean, one example was where I kind of just took myself out of my business for a little while, and one other thing that I'm passionate about other than clothing is food. Ingredients and flavors and eating the stuff and getting fat because of the stuff, but also the way that the top chefs work in Michelin star kitchens. So I remember when I first started my business, and we were just trying to find a way to kind of just do things just a little bit differently. I was just absorbing the autobiographies of lots of top chefs, Gordon Ramsay and a bunch of others, and also just kind of being a bit more observant when I was in their places, kind of looking behind the scenes at how the kitchens ran, at all the different people within the kitchen who had all of the different roles, the pastry chef, the sous chef, the head chef, the way that when dishes were created and they were ready to go to the customer, they wouldn't go directly from the kitchen to the customer. They always go to the pass. And then the pass is where the head chef then casts his eye over, and if there's anything he's not happy about, the dish goes back, and if it can be fixed very quickly, it can be fixed, but if it's really beyond hope, it gets scrapped and they have to start again. That's how we started to just change the way we then took that back to the workroom and the way that we create clothes. And we started to do the same thing. We started to look really, really carefully at the ingredients that were going into the clothing, from the threads to not just the fabric that you see, but everything that lies underneath, the buttons and so on. We almost started to create like a Michelin star sort of environment within the workroom. So everybody when looking at individuals and their talent, what they were best at, just letting them stick to doing that. And then everything basically comes through eventually to me as the head chef goes on to my master QC rail, which is the one where I check everything before it goes to the customer. And obviously, if there's anything wrong, it gets thrown straight back. And that really kind of transformed our business. That sort of simple concept of taking, I guess, what on the surface might seem a very different business, but in actual fact, when you look at it and compare the two, they're very, very similar. You're taking a lot of the best ingredients you can lay your hands on, and you're turning them into something that you pass to a customer, and it gives them an experience. In our case, it's touch and it's visual, and in, I guess, a restaurant's case, it's visual and it's taste. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Ray Inamoto, who is Japanese American innovation specialist, who used to be in advertising and now he runs an innovation agency, gave a similar talk to what you just did at Cannes.
Oh, wow. Now
So
I feel a
great
bit
minds.
smarter.
What do they say about great creative minds thinking alike?
Yeah. So I've always been a daydreamer since I was a small child, right? So I would always get locked inside my head and I could create, vivid worlds and things. I remember once we had an assignment, we read this we read a story called The Monkey's Paw, which I'm sure you would have heard of, where okay, so it's one of those, it's a bit like a Twilight Zone episode where, a guy finds a monkey's paw and he gets three wishes off of it, but every wish is granted in the way that, like, the wishes turn out really bad. right? So he wishes to be rich, but in the process of becoming rich, he might lose everything in his life, or his wife might die or something. And so the assignment we were given was to write a short two-sided story based on the same thing about a wish that doesn't go the way it's supposed to. I never completed that homework assignment, not that year anyway. And it was the only piece of homework because I was a SWAT at school. And long story short, I submitted it about 3 years later. So I started when I was about 11 years old. I submitted it when I was about 15, and it turned into like a 300-page book called The Three Wishes. And it was pretty much a horror story. But my imagination used to just go wild on these things. And I would just run away. And thankfully, I had an English teacher who would let me do that. And I think I'm still the same as what's supposed to be a fully grown adult nowadays. But my point is, if I can take you back to when you were very young, what were you like growing up?
I wanted to be you growing up. I wanted to, I wanted to be a fashion designer. I would sit and draw fashions all day long, and I would have my dolls, and I would actually, as a really bad child, cut up clothing that my mother owned or I owned, and make clothes for my dolls. My paternal grandfather was in the dress manufacturing business, and when I was about, I guess, 7 or 8, he would come over, and my mother showed my fashion illustrations to him. And he said, "Oh no, she copied these. They can't possibly be original." And they were. He didn't believe it, but that was what I loved to do. And then when I was a freshman in college, one of my professors dissuaded me from going into fashion design, saying that it was just so hugely competitive. And then I wanted to be a dancer, and people dissuaded me, discouraged me from that too. So interesting that people like us who are in the arts can almost see ourselves in other art forms, in other arts as well. I think it is a kind of mindset where you think in a certain way, and you see the beauty in things, and you love to solve problems. And you said that you think in terms of imagery, right? I do too. So it's an interesting life, the lives that you and I lead in terms of seeing the world.
I described it to a recent guest as the inside of my head is basically like a Disney movie. So whenever I'm looking to try and solve a problem, there's a lot of animation and so on, sort of going. It's just the way that I kind of turn things around. But yeah, I don't think that through trauma or whatever else, I don't think I've really matured that much mentally either, which I don't know. I think it's quite a nice thing sometimes.
Same.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have to stay that way because there is an innocence in seeing the world anew all the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How over the years have things changed in the way that because you're still teaching and lecturing, right?
Yes.
With each generation, is things starting to change in the way that they kind of approach problem solving and creativity and so on? Because obviously, back when we were kids, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have, I mean, all the things that people have nowadays, Instagram and Twitter and all these distractions and, influences on our mindset and mental health. How are you finding that kids with each generation have changed over the last sort of 20 years or so?
That's a great point. This generation that I'm teaching right now, Gen Z, is very different than the last 3 generations, I think, that I've come across. Well, maybe 2. I don't want to make myself bad. Gen Z is really different, and they're different for one reason that you already stated. They are very influenced by influencers, whether it's politics or fashion or pop music's very big on their list. I have students who are working their way through college, saving money to go see Harry Styles in a concert across the country or across the world. I mean, they're very, very devoted to musical artists. That's one thing. So they're influenced by all the things that they see on the internet, good or bad, they are. On the other hand, they're extraordinarily aware of their values, and they have to align with a brand's values or a company's values in order to patronize that brand. They are very conscious of whether people are greenwashing or any kind of falsehoods whatsoever. They are authentic people. There is no BS. They see right through BS. I love them for that. I love the fact that they are the most ethical group I've taught in a long time. I teach at a very diverse, with a very diverse community at our institution. We have people from all backgrounds, all races, all ethnicities, and so I think I'm very lucky to be in a situation where students are getting multiple perspectives, and that amplifies creative thinking. You know, when you're in a group of people who are alike, that's group think, that you're not going to grow. But when you're in a diverse community, it really amplifies imagination, creativity, and especially when you're open to it, and you establish dialogue and not debate. And that's what we encourage, dialogue, that everybody's respectful and listen. But it's just so rich when the community is diverse.
I think being able to be respectfully challenged is really important to creative thinking as well. Because sometimes, especially if you generally work quite a lot in isolation, like I do, I very often have to kind of, I'm trying to build a support network of people that I meet with regularly where, we can share ideas and toss things around, but then I openly invite them to challenge me on things as well, because, you can get kind of stuck into turning the Rubik's Cube just one way.
Yes, absolutely. And the students, it's interesting. They're very open to other people's viewpoints about culture and community and body type and gender fluidity. I mean, but the only heated arguments are about design. So it's kind of interesting about how they're holding their own ground about what they think editorial design should look like. Or, I mean, it's just kind of like these really niche arguments that they have. But other than that, they're just wonderfully open, loving generation.
Yeah. Going back to the 50s, New Art of Ideas, and what you said earlier about how theories from that time, 60, 70 years ago, have not changed until now. For people that don't know, could you kind of give an overview of how we've been sort of doing things for the last 60, 70 years?
Yes, absolutely.
And then we can go on to how that's going to change.
Yes, absolutely. In 1926, Graham Wallas, a British philosopher, wrote The Art of Thought. And in that, he proposed a 4-step method for coming up with ideas. And it involves preparation, which is doing your research, and then incubation, thinking about what you've researched, and then verifying it, and then executing it. The incubation part is where the idea should be illuminated. All right. I'm wrong. The incubation part you're thinking about, the next step is illumination. So that's the aha moment. What happens for me in that process, because that's a process that most people use who are in design and in advertising, is that the illumination portion of it, that step, is kind of a black box. It's sort of like, well, how does that aha moment happen? And then in 1953, James Webb Young, who was an advertising executive at a top agency in New York, adapted Wallace's process and made it a 5-stage process. And he used it in his ad agency. And he wrote a book about it. I think The Technique of Ideas. I forget the exact title. It's more easily used by creatives, people who are creative professionals, because we kind of think that way. But when other people have to use that process, again, that illumination phase is like, how does the idea come together? And then in 1953, Alex Osborne, another advertising executive, coined the term brainstorming that he used in his agency. And again, creative professionals had a bit of an easier time throwing, like if you and I came together and we started throwing out ideas about my ideal little black dress, that we would come up with something because that's what we do. But for other people, brainstorming, again, is sort of like, okay, we're throwing out ideas, but how does it form? We're throwing out suggestions, but how does the idea form? And in all of my teaching, I just found that students were still mystified. We teach that process. Oh, and there's another process that actually is really, really good. And that's where and everybody knows this one, and it really works. But I'll give you the caveat there.
Yeah.
You take two things that are already existing and you combine them into a new thing, right? So you have smartphones and you have taxis, and now you've got Uber, right? You join them together, you get a new thing. That's been used by Einstein and Steve Jobs and Mark Twain and all these great thinkers. But that's only one way. Plus, how do you know the idea is a good one? I mean, you can get the idea, but is it stupid? Is it harebrained? Is it dangerous? What is it? What's the animal that you've now created? And so after teaching all these years, I've taught literally thousands of people to generate ideas, a lot of ideas every day, because the people I teach are in advertising and in design, and they have to generate a lot of ideas, as you know, every day, because a client's not going to buy just, you can't just walk in and say, here's my one idea. I mean, unless you're like the global chief creative officer, maybe. And so I came up with a method. And my students, we have 98% employment in top ad agencies.
Wow. There was an example that you gave, in your about section when I was reading about you, about one of your students, Brooke. Would you share that story with us? Sure.
Brooke, I teach a lot of very talented people. She's one of them. She, in her junior year, not even her senior or junior year, got an internship at VaynerMedia, which is run by Gary Vaynerchuk.
Vaynerchuk. I have his books literally right behind me, right there.
So, it's a really good agency. And she was on a team with other interns. She was an art direction intern, and she worked with copywriting interns and other interns. And after her first week, she came back and she said, Robin, I have to tell you that they gave us an assignment, and I'm saying, well, we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. And everybody else was just sitting there. All the other interns were just sitting there. And I thought, okay, this is it. I mean, this is it.
Yeah, this is the proof.
I've taught her to generate a lot of ideas, and she's not the only one. So most of my students, are climbing the ladder in the creative industries. So I thought I have to codify it. I really have to put it together. And then I thought, well, this actually works across disciplines. And when I consult and I see in marketing or in engineering labs, it works. And if you reverse engineer really good ideas, you can see how my method plays out.
My God, now I can't wait to get my hands on your book, Robin, because it sounds like you've basically found now, I don't know if this is actually, I've only seen it in movies, but it sounds like if we were all bottles of Coke, you found the Mentos to drop in to cause that bottle of Coke to just explode all over the place, like ideas shooting out left, right, and center, can't stop it. so I don't want to get into the method necessarily because obviously we don't want to give that away because
I
that's
can
what
give it
people.
away. I'll give
Oh,
it
okay,
away.
go on then.
I'll give it away. Because you really need to, get more flesh on it. But
Yeah.
it's called it's a whole framework, but the essence of it is the three G's. And it's really easy to remember too. There's goal, there's gap, and there's gain.
Hmm.
Your goal is what you want to achieve. And most people think that's the idea, but it's not yet. That's just your goal, what you want to achieve. Then you have to think about the gap. And this is where it gets really interesting. So if you wanted to launch a new fashion line, what would fill a gap? Who is there an underserved audience? Is there an ignored audience? Is there something that would address a pain point in fashion? Is there a new manufacturing method that hasn't been tried? Is there a toxic free method? Is there a more sustainable method?
Hmm.
So the gap is really looking at what's missing, the missing part. And I really think that if you're not addressing a gap, the goal might not be worthwhile. But now there's another step to take, and that's to ask, what's the gain? So if you were to come out with a fashion line that was 100% sustainable, well, that's a gain. That's a gain for people. That's a gain for the planet. That's a gain for creatures. So what's in it for people, the planet, society, a community, creatures, besides profit?
Yeah.
So I really believe in the triple bottom line, which is profit, people, planet. But when you go through those three G's, and you could start it at any point. So let's say you're in the fashion industry and you notice that very tall women aren't being addressed, or very short women aren't being addressed in the industry. So you notice a gap. Then you can think about what would the gain be, and then you form your goal. So you can you can start with any one of the G's and end
Yeah.
up with an idea.
That's awesome. It also, I mean, I thought of an example right there while you were talking, as a gap, which is that right now in London, I don't know if it's the same in New York, but we're very known for being suited and booted and being very well dressed over here. That is not the case anymore, Robin. Born out of the pandemic and people wearing comfy clothes and not having to dress up anymore, they're now venturing out and wearing baggy bottoms and t-shirts and stuff, and not as many people. The suit is starting to come back, but the new dress code is business or smart casual. And can probably sum this up with one of my clients recently, who's on the global board of a big American, actually, real estate firm. And we got into a meeting room, we sat down. I was there to help take care of some new clothes for him. And he just sat down and he sighed and his shoulders dropped. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Bobby, it has never been more complicated to be a man than now." And I said to him, "I'm guessing you meant that in two ways. Number one, from a point of view of dressing for business, which is why I'm here. Number two, simply just being a male in a leadership position in a global company in this day and age." And he said, "Yeah, you're right." So, and he's not the only one that has that problem. There are lots of guys that get up and it's, "Yeah, I don't have to wear a suit anymore. I'm in smart casual wear." They don't have the first clue where to start with it. It's a confusing world for them. That's the big gap right now. Another one is when you talk about gender fluidity. So I have a couple of trans clients. One is in transition, the other one has transitioned. Another who actually is probably the better example is non-binary. They went to Savile Row and a few of my other peers, and partly because those tailors mainly cater for men, but also based on assumptions from what they could see of the client. They were just basically making men's shirts and jackets and, pants and things for them. And it's not what they wanted. They wanted clothes that, or want clothes that, represent exactly who they are. One of the best examples I can give is if you've ever seen Billions, there's a character there played by Asa Kate Dillon called Taylor Mason, and the way that they dress is impeccable. Whoever's doing the wardrobe for that show is doing such a great job, because you don't even need to get into a conversation or a debate about it. You look at them and exactly, they just look like a whole person. And so when they found me, I invited them into the workroom, sat down, and we just spent the first 30 minutes just talking. But I just listened to everything that they told me. And the only questions I asked them was, how do you want to protect yourself? How do you want people to see you? How do you want things to fit and feel and function? Because we still do live in a world where the majority of clothing is designed for either men or for women. And then once I had all of that information, we started with just the first outfit, just to make sure that I was heading in the right direction. And, the feedback from them was just overwhelming. But it all came from a point of just being there and being open-minded and listening. Because I'll be honest, I'm still kind of getting used to all of this stuff. It's not something that was really talked about when I was a kid growing up. This sort of stuff was very taboo. So I need to be educated as well. And the only way to do that, I think, it's the same with any client, really. You need to listen to them and find out as much as you can about them. And then once you've got all that information, that's where you can then suddenly start to put your ideas together. But there's a huge gap there. The gain is obvious. Obviously, you've got a whole community of people who are beyond being underserved. They're not even being looked at. People don't know how to deal with them. People are not taking the time to educate themselves to work out how to deal with them. The answers are, ask them how they want to be served, and then you've got your answers, and you can go from there and create your ideas and so on. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm going off on the tangent again. I'm so sorry.
No, that's exactly it. You gave away half my book. Yeah, that's exactly it. Is that, first of all, you listened, right? So you could learn, and then that is an ignored or underserved audience. That is a gap. And there are a lot of underserved audiences and underserved communities and underserved countries. Think about tropical diseases. There's not a lot of research conducted in tropical diseases. It's just amazing when you really start to look at all the gaps in every discipline and in every industry, and where people put research money, or where people think they're going to get the most bang for their buck, because they're just thinking about profit. And what I'm really interested in are worthwhile ideas worth pursuing, where there is something in it for individuals or society or the well-being of the planet.
It was interesting also what you were talking about, Gen Z being highly aware of companies who are being disingenuous.
Yes.
So we talk a lot about virtue signaling nowadays. So you had the whole, Me Too movement, and then suddenly you had people jumping on the bandwagon. You had a lot of, prominent male celeb talking about hashtag Me Too, and you kind of like, your immediate reaction is, what experience do you have? There's nothing that you've said that makes me think you can empathize with what victims have gone through. The same on the whole kind of pride movement as well, where suddenly, we did it as well. I had someone who heard the story of my transgender clients and said, you did something really great there. What you need to do is tell the world that there's a safe space within bespoke tailoring where that community can come to. I'm stuck with that one. I did follow the initial advice, which was to create pride branding, right? So the kind of rainbow sort of version of our logos and everything. And they look fantastic. I've done nothing with them.
If you're a safe space, that is such a gain for people.
Totally. But at the same time, I was kind of like, okay, this all looks fantastic, but I need to be sensitive to how we then start putting it out there, because I don't want to be like everybody else in my industry who's doing it. And they may not be disingenuous. It's just the way that they do it. And it's so overbearing as well that I don't want to be patronizing to that audience. Does that make sense?
You're an ally. That's where your heart is. You're an ally.
Yeah. I guess this brings me neatly into where you have a situation like that. So you've identified the gap, you've worked out the gains, you're kind of ready to kind of go out to the world and start shining a light on what you can do for AN community or whatever it is. How do you then start to work out the best approach so that it's done in the correct way, whatever it is for whatever it is?
Well, I think you started the correct approach by listening to your client, right, and listening to their pain points, to what would make their lives easier. So I'll give you an example in another sector. MasterCard in the banking industry realized that people in the trans community and the non-binary community had difficulty using credit cards or debit cards with their birth names. And so they came out with the True Name card. So you could put your name on the card that was not your birth card. And they tried to get banks on board, and banks didn't want to get on board. And they finally got one bank on board, and then other banks came on board. And now there is the MasterCard True Name card that has helped so many people. I mean, it almost it's embarrassing and it can be risky. There can be arguments, and it's just eased a pain point. So I think when you think about a pain point, and as soon as you were talking about what you had done in your bespoke fashion industry, in your business, is all I could see was your website with different models of different clothing, and it just keeps scrolling, and you're not even just saying, hey, listen, I do this. I can see that you're doing it.
Yeah.
I can see what you've done. I can see who's wearing it. I can see, and then there's a tab that, I don't know what you'd want to call it, but gender neutral garments, or but I think you demonstrate to people. I mean, and since it's bespoke, you don't have to manufacture it, right? And in multiples. So, but you're right. I think you just have to approach it with some research and sensitivity and a lot of listening.
Yeah. I've already reached out to that audience to ask them. So I was kind of just playing, I don't know what the phrase is, devil's advocate or whatever, on behalf of the audience. But, I just kind of followed the same template as I did with that one individual, and have just gone out to. So we're in the process of collecting a lot of data now, and and then once we've got that data, then the ideas can start to flow, and then we can start to, do whatever it is that we end up doing. But yeah, I also love being challenged to think in ways that are uncomfortable, is probably not the right word, but just that little bit more challenging. There's just kind of a bit more kind of outside of what you would normally do, or what things that you've never had to really deal with before. I find that really can be quite liberating once you get into that process as well.
Absolutely. There's a well-known American designer named Paula Scher, who's part of Pentagram, and Pentagram originated in London, but in the New York office. And she's very well known for her typography and poster design. But she said that now she really likes to take on different assignments, environmental design assignments, because they make her nervous.
Wow.
Because it's not in her exact comfort zone.
Yeah. It's almost like, sometimes you need to be put in a straitjacket to then really work your brain to try and, kind of find different ideas and so on. Also to try and get out of the straitjacket as well. So, and then also the other thing I wanted to ask you as well is, so I often come across this, and I'm sure you have as well. I'll get people who say to me, and sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're people I meet for the first time at a wedding or an event or something. And they're like, wow, what you do, oh my God, it's so interesting, and it's so creative. And I could never be like that. I haven't got a creative bone in my body. I don't believe that. I believe that all human beings are capable of generating ideas. I think all of us do it anyway, whether we're aware of it, and then we follow professions like you and I have, so that we can actually do it every single day. Or whether you repress it and you think that you're completely dumb and you can't think of anything creative, you can't do anything creative, you're not artistic, and so on. What do you say to people? How do you deal with people you come across who are that way, who really think that they don't have a creative bone in their body, and if you ask them how they might generate ideas, they just don't know where to start?
This is very common. And I think that most people are under the misconception that they can't be creative, but they can. And it's not them, it's the system, it's the process. So again, the processes that we're taught really are very difficult ones, because, as I said, where in that process do you actually understand how the idea forms? And I've been teaching for many years, and in my university, in my program, the people coming in are talented. They are people who, some of us have certain inclinations or abilities. If you asked me to figure out electricity, we'd be sitting in the dark. My brain doesn't work that way. But I've also taught people not in the major. And with the right teacher, everybody can generate a creative idea. A creative idea is actually not so hard, because a creative idea is a twist on something that exists. A new idea is more difficult, because then you're innovating. And I think people always think that something creative is new, but it's not necessarily new. But it is not them, it's the process they're using. And if they switch their process, they'd be more creative. And if they employed the things that creative people do. In fact, I'm just working on an article on that, about building curiosity, building mindful observation, listening. There are all these things that we can do, asking certain kinds of questions, such as what if? What if we could beam ourselves to another physical space? What if we could fly? What if? And if you read science fiction, there are tons of what if questions and answers in science fiction, and that opens up your thinking. But it's kind of a mindset. It's building habits of being curious and open and resilient. But it's also, you need the right process.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if Elon Musk would ever listen to this, because he seems to be like one of the greatest modern day examples of that. I was reading an article yesterday where he is planning to put into prototype a house robot that will, do everything for you. It will do all the kind of menial jobs like taking out the trash and so on, but also will cook your meals for you, almost be like a robot housekeeper, which for me is like a dream come true. I'm like, where can I pre-order and sign up for one? He says the intention is to primarily, or initially primarily, to help the elderly and to help the less abled to improve their quality of life by having this machine that can do all the things that they struggle with or just cannot do. And which I think is such an amazing thing. But when you look at other things that he's doing as well, like, his goal of colonizing Mars one day, I've got no interest in that whatsoever, because, as far as I'm concerned, Earth is the safest place to be in this solar system. I do not want to depart from our atmosphere. If you've watched the TV show For All Mankind, you'll know why I have those.
Agree.
Yeah, I love that show so much. Like one of my favorite shows of all time. You take the Tesla. So go back to something you said earlier, that is the blending of the car and essentially the smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't create Uber, it created something else. It created a car that could generally park itself, apparently. I don't have the guts to try one of those out, but
Neither do I.
but he's one of the great modern day examples. And then the other guy you mentioned, Steve Jobs. I mean, come on, he's transformed the way that we think through whatever his creative process was. And some people do say it's, just down to the way that his brain would think about business processes and the way that humans interact and so on. And some people say it's purely down to LSD. Whatever it was, I think we owe quite a great debt. Maybe that's a bit extreme to people who are like that, but they are so. Take away everything else, the megalomaniac stuff and the fact that they're billionaires and all the rest of it. I think they're a testament to creative thinking, and we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss that.
Absolutely.
Aside from the book, anything else that you're working on right now? Anything else that you're getting yourself involved with?
Yes, I'm actually working on another book. And I just love to I actually mentor faculty around the country and sometimes internationally on research and writing books. And for most people, writing is a painful process, not for writers, but for most people. And I really like it. It's sort of like drawing or painting. You get in this zone and the endorphins flow. So I'm writing another book about titled Shareworthy, about advertising that people are willing to share because it's so good and so entertaining and so creative. So I'm working on that, and I'm writing articles, and I'm on a book tour, and I'm dancing. I dance every day to keep my own creative juices flowing.
Yep. With your husband when he's around, right?
I love to dance with my husband when he's around, but since we haven't gone out that much, I actually take online jazz and Broadway classes.
Fantastic. One of my previous guests, Mark Hirschberg, he's based in, I think he's based in New York as well. Oh, he might be Chicago. I need to double check that. But he was a national ballroom dancer. Like, he's proficient in about 17 or 18 different, I'm going to have to listen to that episode again, but he's proficient in like 17 or 18. I think out of all the, like there's ballroom and Latin, he's proficient in all of them bar two.
Wow.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah.
Well,
So
Latin was my entry point. My father was one of the people who was part of the whole Latin movement in New York City, of Latin dance movement in New York City. And so, so that Latin music is in my blood, and that's where I entered into dance. But now I love everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Latin is great.
Yeah, I love watching, but I can't do it. I have zero hip movement whatsoever. If my wife was here, she'd be laughing and she'd tell you, yeah, he's basically a tree.
Yes, but you're very, very coordinated, so you could learn.
I have honestly tried with mixed results as being generous. And
it will make you learn the foxtrot, no hip movement necessary.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I like the foxtrot. I like the look of it anyway. And tell me about Jeopardy, because that's your mommy-daughter time, right?
Yes. I have a daughter who's 24, and the only reason that she's still at home is because of COVID hit. When she graduated in 2020, that's when we went into lockdown. And my daughter and my students, that was just really bad moment for that graduating class of 2020, because my daughter expected to get a job writing for television in LA, and she was leaving, and and now she's stuck in her little girl room. And and her friends, she was at NYU, and her friends went back to Singapore and went back to California and went back to at NYU. They come from all over the world, and now she's back home. So we all love Jeopardy, my husband, my daughter, and I, and he gets home towards the end, but that's our 30 minutes a day together, and I can't beat her no matter what I do. My brain is just not as fast as hers anymore, and I keep telling her to try out for Jeopardy. She gets almost every answer. It's just amazing.
Jeopardy is the show where like the host asks a question and then you have to jump in, but every answer starts with who is. So like,
right.
Which British Prime Minister was a complete douchebag recently? Who is Boris Johnson? Right.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Try not to get political on this show, but
well, Well, Jeopardy is a little left leaning, so you're in the ballpark.
Yeah, I watch SNL as well. One of my favorite shows, has been for ages. So how do you, so this is kind of my last question because I appreciate time's getting on and I've just held on to you for longer than I should have done. All this stuff kind of pouring out your head all the time because your brain obviously works in that way. How does Robin switch off and just give herself a break?
I watch television or I read. I mean, you're right. Actually work. It's terrible. It's not a good habit, 7 days a week. But there's a point in the day where I just give out because, as you know, when you're creating, it takes a lot of energy, and concentrating takes a lot of energy. Teaching takes, oh my goodness, carrying all those people. And I teach 6-hour classes, so that's a long day with all those Gen Z kids. And so I just watch really, really good television, really good. Like I watched All for Mankind, and I love really good programming.
Yeah, I'm the same. So recently Better Call Saul, For All Mankind.
Yes,
For All Mankind is stressful though, like really stressful
yes,
viewing.
it is. Yes,
I
and
imagine.
sorry.
No, I was going to say, bringing it back to creativity. I say to my wife, it's like, I mean, there was an incident in season 3, kind of early on, where they were trying to dock the Russian ship with the US one. Do you remember? And then that
Yes.
catastrophe happened right at the end of that episode. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And we were like, yeah, exactly, that reaction. And I
yeah.
turned around to my wife and I said, I would love to be in the writer's room for that show because they must just get together every week. And then the first question they ask themselves, like blank whiteboard, how can we give the audience a heart attack or make them cry this week? Go, go. And then, they start shooting out ideas. And I'd hate to think of the ideas that were rejected because they must be worse than what we actually finally get to see on screen, right?
Well, if you want more heart attacks, watch, if you haven't seen it, the Nordic noir, The Bridge from Sweden.
Oh, we saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
I would love to be in that writer's room because it's the most bizarre catastrophes and tragedies that, yeah. And
Yeah.
I love BBC mysteries and
Yeah, I mean, if you like The Bridge, then you just basically lock into the whole Scandinavian thriller category of Netflix, and
yes.
you'll be happily terrified for weeks and weeks and weeks.
That's right. No, I loved Line of Duty. Did you see that? The BBC.
Yeah. Very stressful again.
Yes. Yes.
It was one of those where you almost don't do, because over here, obviously, when it comes out, we get it week to week. I
Right.
don't know if it's the same for you guys out there as well. But my wife and I, we basically just try and avoid it for at least the first 3 or 4 weeks, so that then we don't have to wait
Right.
so long. We can just kind of binge watch 3 or 4 in a row. But yeah, very stressful. But talking about TV shows and great recommendations between the two of us, hopefully for people who haven't seen any of those shows, get to it. Is that sometimes you do just need to turn the tap off, to use the water analogy again. It's flowing all day and it's non-stop. And as great as that is, and as inspiring as it is, and as exciting as it is, it can get really tiring as well because you're using your brain so much. And when you lay your imagination on top of that, it gets even more tiring eventually. So sometimes you do just have to kind of just turn the tap off, do what my wife and I like to call a brain dump, which is we'll try and find something we can watch where we can literally just take our brain out and put it on the sofa on the side, and then just kind of watch something for half an hour, and then you put your brain back in, and it's had a bit of a break, and then you can and then the tap just turns on and it starts flowing again.
Yes, I totally agree. I also look for programming though that's really thoughtful and beautiful. So like Better Call Saul with the art director and the the person in charge of filming and photography, just the details, and then I just watched Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. And sometimes if I'm getting bored with something, I'll toggle between my email and my phone, and I couldn't take my eyes off the screen.
I do exactly the same. I'm a real fidget with like my if
Yeah.
something's not really engaging me,
Yes.
I will literally, that is the big test for me, is if
Yes.
suddenly my phone ends up in my hand and I'm like, just kind of looking at other stuff.
That's my
Um,
rating. That's how I
yeah,
rate the shows, how often I've checked my phone.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Wow. Wow. Oh, Robin, where can people find you online? Today's been such a delight. Thank you so much.
You are just so wonderful. You are a delight. Thank you so much for inviting me. I could talk to you forever. My website, they can get actually free downloads, quick start guides to some of my books, and composition checklist, and a worksheet for the idea book. It's my name, robinlanda.com. And they can link in with me on LinkedIn, or follow me, or connect on Instagram and TikTok, even on TikTok and
Wow,
Twitter
TikTok as
and
well.
TikTok as well. I'm trying.
Yeah. How are you? People keep telling me I need to. So I have a TikTok account. I posted one thing on there, which I then immediately had a bunch of people just jump on me saying it was the most boring thing they'd ever seen.
Be
To be,
you. Just be you.
yeah,
You,
well,
you would be fantastic on TikTok. Do exactly what you're doing right now, but just in short bursts.
yeah, no, exactly. I posted one reel on Instagram where it was just a 30-second of me getting dressed in the morning, and it was one of my most engaged posts ever. It just went crazy.
Think about Be Real for you too, since you're in your studio. That would be a good platform for you. Yeah, no, I think you're a great personality. You should do vids and not still posts.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm gearing up to it. So I've been doing reels with my clients that I've been fitting and their reaction to their new clothes and stuff. So obviously the next, but I know by looking at the metrics and stuff that the posts on social media, etc., that are the most engaging, the most popular, are the ones where I've put myself there. And as nice as that is, thank you everybody who always likes my post when I put a picture of myself up. I kind of am scared of being seen as a bit of a narcissist as well, but then
No,
you know
you're a great
given what
personality. You're so handsome, you're obviously well tailored. So you've got it all. You're the package. Put it out there.
given what they want, right?
Yeah.
um Now, Robin, as well, so I will have all of your links in the show notes. I also just want to make sure that everybody knows that your new book, The New Art of Ideas, Unlock Your Creative Potential. Now, normally with your books, you donate royalties to students. So you donate to give scholarships to students so that they can go to college and so on. You're doing something slightly different with the proceeds of this book. Tell
Yeah.
me what you're doing.
Yes, this book, and actually the book that just preceded it, Strategic Creativity. I'm with so much that's going on in the world, in Haiti and in Ukraine and in Puerto Rico. I'm giving my portion to disaster relief and humanitarian relief. So the reason that I hustle so much is this is the money that I make from my books that I can actually do some good with. Teacher salary, you can't give that much away, but I try. But this is why I hustle.
That's awesome. Robin's new book comes out in November, but it is available to pre-order right now. I'll put the link in the show notes. If you've loved today's episode, Robin is a very easy person to want to spend more time with. Then please do consider pre-ordering her book right now. Don't delay. And you'll also be doing some good as well for those worthy causes, for some really sad things that are happening around the world right now. Robin, I have to ask you my final question that I ask every guest. Have you had fun today?
I had a great amount of fun, and you just made my whole week, my month, my year. You are so wonderful and so delightful. I'm absolutely serious. You're terrific. No wonder you're so popular. You're terrific.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad we've done this, because I've made a new friend / mentor, because I got a feeling that you haven't finished telling me all the things that you want to tell me, because I've probably inspired you with some stuff as I've been rambling on.
Right back at you.
Yeah. Well, my next job after we get off this call is to actually pre-order your book. So I'll get to that, and you lot make sure you do as well. Thank you, Robin, and thank you all so much for joining Robin and I on this episode. Don't forget that Tailoring Talk is now on Instagram at Tailoring Talk Podcast, and you know I love feedback, so you can also email the show directly at tailoringtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. You can also click the share button in your player to send the show on to people you know and who you think would benefit from Robin's infinite wisdom. If you're enjoying Tailoring Talk and feel compelled to throw some change our way and support the show, you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Roberto Revilla. Have a great week, and I'll see you on the next one.